African. Well, he is black African. African equals black.
I've heard it, I just don't know what.
Yeah, yeah, very important invention. But I would say, rather than yes or no, it depends on the context, because you can have one person who is doing it and they understand that I am part of all of this.
I am nature.
Right. So in that sense, this person is doing the same. It looks like they're doing the same thing as this other person, but what's their objective? What's their understanding? In that sense, I wouldn't say that that one is externalizing. But then you can have another person who's like, the only way I can get good, get healed, is if I do this, and then I do,
And I can't leave the house without my crystal pack.
right. So,
Extremes.
but so, and then there are gradients in between those two extremes. So it's like, what do we? It's not necessarily a yes or no answer to that question. You can have somebody who says, "Oh, my crystal pack isn't there. That means I'm gonna die." Then they walk out into the street and then they die. Or they can say, you know, whatever I need is inside of me. There's this brother in Madagascar. They do what's called morengi. Madagascar, represent. They do what's called morengi. And a lot of the fighters, it looks a little bit like Muay Thai if you see it. A lot of the fighters, they'll have all these talismans all over, but there's one who doesn't use talisman. He said, my strength is that I don't need it, you know. So for him, you know, he's seeing it that and he defeats all these people who do have talismans, so I guess they're second guessing and thinking about it. But for him, that's his way of saying that, you know, I'm not relying internally. You could have somebody who has talisman and said, this is part of me, right? I got this from my ancestors, my grandparents, all of this is part of me, but what happens if this one is taken away? I think that's the major question. Because it's inside. So what is your mind telling you? This one has gotten lost. So now when you go into the fight, do you say, all right, I'm about to die, and then you just go off and die? Or do you have an understanding that, you know, all of it is really coming from, you know, myself? But just coming to the fractures. This is African philosophy, the Pharaonic period. And this is Theophilo Benga. And this is what they call an Edwin Smith papyrus, because they always name it after whoever stole it. And this is dealing with the lesion of the spinal column. So this is the Mdw Ntr, then he gives the transliteration and then the translation. So instructions on a dislocated vertebra in a patient's neck. On examining a man suffering from the dislocation of a vertebra in his neck, if you observe that he is no longer in control of his two arms and legs as a result, and that his phallus is erect on that account, dripping urine without his knowing it, while at the same time his body is distended with air and his eyes are bloodshot, it is a dislocation of a vertebra in his neck, spreading along his spinal column, as a result of which he no longer has control of his two arms and legs. If it is the middle vertebra of his neck which is dislocated and emission of the sperm occurs from his phallus. So this is 4,000 plus years ago. And in this is why you have to go to the original text, because the person could say, oh, they never had to deal with it. And then you could just say, oh, well, and now you've built up an entire worldview on the basis of incorrect information. That person just had never read any of these source texts, because...
Well, just quick point of clarification. There are some injuries today that they were saying that we get...
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because of I'm
microwave ovens, you know, Wi-Fi, hang gliding, swimming with sharks.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Extreme sports, right? So I'm completely perfect with that. However, to say that there were never breaks or fractures, this is somebody who is either duped or is a duper, a super duper. So because again, when you go to the source text, you can read what your own ancestors said. So whether it's a European interpreter or even an African interpreter who's telling you this, just let me read what did my ancestors think was important enough that they said this needs to transcend 5,000 years just so you can read it. Now they went through all of that effort, but imagine I just don't even, it looks like pretty pictures to me. Look at the bird, right? Then the whole point is missed. But if somebody comes up with a movie or an article, they say, oh, I want my article to get 1,000 reads and likes, and I'll post something on Facebook, how important is that? But this is something that we said we're going to carve this into stone. We're going to drag this stone that is 2 tons for 400 miles, carve 6 inches deep into it because it's important enough for you to read, but now we don't know how to read it. Or even if we have even heard that it exists, we say, oh, well, it's not egalitarian, so later for it. You understand? But you want us to read your likes. Well, here we come. Instructions recording. I have a thing against Facebook, so if you're around me for long enough.
I'm with you on that.
There we go. So instructions regarding a wound in the patient's temple. You know, I was at one point in time, or when we were going through this, so I just got Ghanaian citizenship. I was feeling a bit some way that I didn't, you know, not everybody got it. And I was like, maybe I should have done more. But I was like, it was on Mdw Ntr Adesua. Every time we had a meeting, I put it on Mdw Ntr Adesua. So I'm not going to be whatever. So anyway, instructions regarding a wound in the patient's temple. If on examining a man with a cut in his temple, you find a prominent swelling behind the cut and also see that he bleeds from his nose and from a single ear, the one below the cut, and it hurts him to hear anyone talk on account of that, then say this about his case. A man with a cut in his temple, bleeding from nose and ear. So this is how to do the diagnosis. Beneath the swelling, it is an illness I shall work against. You shall hold him to his normal regime until you know that he has reached a decisive crisis. But anyway, we can go through many of these. But again, the whole point of pulling this one up is that we have to listen to the voice of our own ancestors. Otherwise, we'll get into a lot of New Age mythology. We'll get into a lot of I don't know what. But at the end of the day, we got into it because we weren't exposed to the words of our ancestors. Now, even when we have the opportunity to read the words of our ancestors, we're taught to block it because the scriptures say that they were enslaving the Hebrews and we're the real Israelites and blah, blah, blah. So there are 1,000 reasons to say, I don't want to know what my ancestors said, right? And people will give you, oh, well, Kemet, they had, pyramids and that's, oppressive and so forth, and therefore I don't want.
Based on our associations, we feel biased somehow.
But meanwhile, you got black people who think that they're Chinese, who think that they're
Like I
Indians,
said,
they're
based on our
Hindus.
associations, we get real biased.
Right. So we become everything else, but then when we say this is our own DNA, we can be black mafiosos, but the one that we're actually connected to, no, that's the one that we say. So yeah, Wu-Tang Clan who think they Chinese, and then they spin off and become Italian mobsters, and nobody has anything to say about that. That's cool. But as soon as you say, all right, let's look at the Nile Valley, no. Oh, you Afrocentric hotel.
They never went into that. Time plan in particular. Never went into a more, you call it Afrocentric. They never went into that.
I don't know what they went into. I grew up in the 90s, so in 1994 they came out with Wu-Tang Clan, and Wu-Tang Clan was based on a movie that they saw, and they thought that they were Chinese folks. I haven't kept up with them since I kind of grew up.
It's not just an affinity, or is it not as an artistic affinity something?
If you haven't, why can't you have an artistic affinity to something African?
You can.
Because they grew up in New York where they were shown movies of Chinese people, and they say, since black people are worthless, let me be like somebody who is worthwhile.
There's so much powerful education about being African in New York too, amongst all of that.
So this is in Shaolin Island, in the projects. This is where they have so much of that information. No, the answer to the question is no. As a young black person growing up in the projects, what you get is African people have never done anything, and it's an insult for anyone to call you African. If someone calls you African, then you are ready to fight that person because they're saying you've never done anything. No one associated with you has ever done anything. You'll never ever be anything because Africans are nothing. This is what you get. So what you see.
There's still some light workers amongst those communities. I live near the projects. I live in Bed-Stuy, and I used to daily see these people who have no idea who they are, and I could tell where exactly they came from. But the concept of them, like even just saying Africa or anything related was uncomfortable. But I noticed that there were workers within all of these communities that were so damaged and that had been there for decades. It was always there for them.
Yeah. So this is the thing. People want, to, at some level, especially when they're young, they want to aspire to be good. So if,
Exactly.
right, if you are, perhaps just by default, we're not going to tell you anything about yourself or anyone who looks like you, but when we're talking about great people, we'll show you Columbus and Shakespeare and Napoleon and Einstein and so forth and so on. Then the natural, if we can call it that, perhaps unnatural or illogical thing is, I want to be like those who are good. If you have a white Jesus on the back of all the trotros that you see driving around, then obviously the next step is going to have billboard for skin bleaching cream and for weaves or whatever. Because exactly. So for these black people to try to be like the invaders to what we now know as China, then that is another manifestation of self-hatred. Black
You
people.
don't think they went through that through the martial arts with that whole esoteric understanding? You don't think that's
I
what
think
they
whatever
were-
they did is a manifestation amongst many manifestations of self-hatred. They could have artistically or whatever associated with something African, but one, miseducation is being taught the wrong thing
It was
about
not
Africa.
available for them to.
That one is diseducation, not even giving you any information. That's by omission. So miseducation is, all right, African people were swinging from trees and, you know, eating each other and blah, blah, blah. That's the miseducation. The diseducation is, we're only going to tell you about important things. Let's go from the beginning of white people to the end of white people. So just by omission, you know I don't look like anybody on that wall there, so therefore I'm the opposite. My only hope is to dress like them, bleach my skin like them, make my hair look like
Cream and all that.
like horse fur, to do anything to be, you know, like them. So for these black people to pretend like they're Chinese is yet another of the many manifestations of self-hatred.
Can I just ask one more thing?
Yeah, feel free.
That's always been a thought, having lived in America for, I always, in my feeling, having lived in Nigeria, and I always felt like this awful traumatic experience that the people through the diaspora had gave them this separation from the culture that was degrading over here, and they were able to make innovations that they weren't allowed to within the culture when they were here, and so that people like you could evolve to the place that you're at, and you could come back here and yeah, your evolution is very unlikely to people who are here right now. Yeah, even with all you're saying, I still feel like yeah, there's so much positivity and light.
Yeah, I
You
would.
have so much to share.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. When I was in Nigeria, this is on the road to Oyo. There was a training seminary, and it started off on this side of the wall. It was a huge mural that went all from one side of this gate to the other side of the gate. And the beginning started with Adam and Eve, who were white. Then it went on to all these other folks who I don't know because I've never read that book. Everybody was white. Everybody was white. Everybody was white. No. I touched one time. I touched one time to hand it from this person to that person, and the lesson was don't sit between two Christians when there's a Bible present, otherwise you may be forced to touch one.
But you're aware of it.
Yeah, I'm aware of it. So anyway, everyone on this wall was white, but then you got down to this part, and at the very bottom was a black figure. Guess what that black figure was? Yes. And that black figure looked like everybody who was going in and out of that gate. I had to actually get out of the car, take a picture of it, so I still have the hard copy of the picture. Then it kept going. So this is the history of the entire, everything from creation up to now, and everyone on there is white. So by omission, what's going on to the psyche of somebody like this age who sees that? What does that, do to them? And then, there are natural progressions that come from that. To the point, what I find here on the continent is there's more of a vilification of everything African, to say it's all savage, heathen, pagan, blah, 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 it's devil worship. I just saw a billboard that said breaking evil altars, and it showed a silhouette of somebody like this with an altar. On the radio, there was somebody who said, and, down with all your ancestral spirits, these evil ancestral spirits, so on, forth and so on. So they vilified the thing. on that side, what they do more is omission, right? So there's vilification, but even more than vilification, we just won't even tell you
On the African, on the
on
diaspora
that side,
Mhm.
on that side, unless you happen to have a good Black History Month or after school program, or, you know, there are ways,
Yes.
cracks, but the general policy is diseducation, or white out, you know, not to give you information. So, oh, go ahead.
What about I know the side of the story and the pain from this experience, but I always feel like I can never view the people here as victims to this
Mhm.
experience. Never, even with all the information, invasions, colonization, Christianity, I can still never view them as victims because there were deals made. You know, there's so much. It was an exchange, and so I cannot strip them of the responsibility for this, so that the healing can come. So how being here, how do you dialogue with the culture here, and well, don't you critique? Or are you accepting of everything as an effect of colonization and Christianity?
Do I critique what?
How culture here.
Very much so.
Because
As a matter of fact, I think it's very necessary for us to
Yeah, that's what I
distinguish
really-
between what is African versus what is anti-African. So the deals that you are talking about are anti-African. Once we understand Kemet, once we understand that we're Black people, then that's when we start to realize we have a common enemy, and then we do things for self-preservation in order to come against a common enemy. That's what happened in Kemet. That's the name Kemet. It means, look, we got enemies right here at the border. We need to see what we all have in common and do things to counter that enemy, whether it's building the walls to the ruler, whether it's, you know, expelling them like the Hyksos, so forth and so on. Once we understand that we have common ground and we have a common enemy, that is a reason for us to come together. Now, what if you're in a position where you don't have that understanding? Then I'm Igbo, you're Yoruba. So if I'm enslaving a Yoruba, what is that? This is a fragment that's trying to get, you know, whatever against my fragment. So this is what you find going on. So even when we're saying African equals Black people, when we're saying Kemet, when we're saying whatever, the point is to get beyond all of this schizophrenic fragmentation, because that, I wouldn't call it African, I would say it's anti-African. It's pro-Igbo perhaps, it's pro-Akan perhaps, it's pro-Ewe perhaps,
Yeah.
but all of those pro-fragments are anti-African. Now on that side, what happened was a huge misfortune, but at the same time, there was a blessing in it that we don't see ourselves as our first thing as, all right, you're, I don't even know, you're Malagasy, right? We would be like, all right, you coming from Jamaica, you Black. You're coming from Haiti, you Black. You're coming from the continent, even to the point where at the extreme, people just say, oh, you're from Africa, speak African, right? That's a very, like, it's all just one big landmass, all of y'all Africans. So that's, you know, on the one hand, you could say, oh, it's a bit naive. On the other hand, it speaks to a broader view that we are all African equals Black people. And therefore, and we also have a very common enemy. If we didn't know that, Berlin Conference should have told us that, because they didn't invite you, who were supposed to be the deal, you know, we're partners with the Danes. All right, well, how come you weren't there? You're partners with the Dutch, you're partners with the Belgians, you're partners with whatever partnership there was.
How come you weren't a stakeholder?
They were very clear on who the actual partners were, and they said at the end of the day, all of us are Eurasians, because Russians were there, white Americans were there. They were very clear on this side of the battle line.
Those same people also enslaved the whole of the Balkans in that
Mhm.
same way before they came here.
Mhm.
I don't think it's just an exclusive Eurasian, but I often think of that Berlin Conference,
Mhm.
and I think actually, instinctively, I feel the people who had stakes in the deal on this side actually didn't want to be present. It was.
They weren't invited.
Why would they want to be present?
They were not invited whether they wanted to or not. So you have Belgium the size of
They
this
weren't.
classroom.
How does it work? I mean, you have this bunch of people in the context
Because
of
all
time
of-
here, the white supremacist
At the
statement.
end of the day, it comes down to self-preservation and what do you understand yourself to be. So they were very clear.
Mhm.
We are inviting ourselves
Of
to
course,
this.
it's they're just looting and sharing the
Mhm.
deal between themselves.
Mhm.
And I'm talking about the agents on this side.
Mhm.
Why would they want to be there? that they were the agents that betrayed this place. Why they don't have the
So,
courage to show their
so
face.
this is what they say. They would say, okay, we're what you're saying is what they would say. We're partners in this. Remember me? Remember your partner? I was the agent. I was your helper. However, they didn't realize how the battle lines are drawn is not between whatever you think your partner or buddy or development partner in these days are. They are clear on who they are and who their enemies were. So those same partners or agents, right after that, colonization comes. Now they're stealing your resources. Now they're stealing your this, your that, everything up to this very date.
Yeah, including the partners that they have here.
Mm-hmm.
It's still the same people.
Mm-hmm.
And how
So the remedy for that is to deal with this anti-African thing that we do. And before you can deal with that, you have to understand who your common enemy is. It's like in Yellowstone National Park in the US, they removed the wolf population, right? They said, all right, so then you had all these elk that kept on breeding. So you had a generation of elk who had no idea that they had natural predators and enemies. So then they decided, oh, the elk are becoming too plentiful, we need to reintroduce wolves. So now you have a generation of elk that have no idea what a wolf is. So the wolves were literally walking right up to the elk, and the elk doesn't know to run, and they are just chewing on its neck. Now from that you could say, oh, well, they're all mammals at the end of the day, right? But that's very little solace for the elk whose neck is being chewed, that, oh, on a fundamental level, we're all, mammals together in this. So the point of this is to say, if you don't know that you have enemies first, and if you're also not clear on who your enemies are, then you will still be brokering all these anti-African deals to the detriment of your own self, to the detriment of your own children, to the detriment of whatever. So you think, okay, this is cool for me, blah, blah, blah. Your nation is being destroyed, your people are being destroyed, and then you are doing whatever and you get deposed in a coup d'etat and your head gets chopped off, right? So even you were the deal broker, but you just got your head chopped off.
Yeah.
And the reason why you were doing that is because you thought you had a partner. Whereas that partner
How do we
still
define
sends
enemy
reality.
for those people, the brokers on this side?
Mm-hmm.
Because
I would say anti-Africans, and you can look at anti-Africanness not only in terms of these big, whatever, like when we talk about self-hatred, we look at Michael Jackson. That's like the very furthest example of it. But all of us have a little agent inside of us. And this is one thing my father says, all of us have this little white agent. So whether it's in the things you decide you want to eat, whether it's in the things that I say I want to wear, whether it's in what I just happen to say I want to watch on TV, the movie I just happen to want to see, all of it is like spirit possession, like Amos Wilson talks about. He has a lecture, Blueprint for Black Power, and he says that it's like spirit possession, and it's like multiple personality syndrome, where you can have one personality when it's in there, it can drink all the orange juice in the world. The second the other personality comes, it breaks out into hives. There's a physiological reaction in the same body that wasn't there before. So if you're looking at it in terms of this same type of spirit possession, phenomena, then what we're seeing is that each and every one of us has in every area of activity anti-African behavior. Sometimes it comes out in the area of health. Sometimes it comes out in the area of social. Sometimes it comes out in the area of economics. I won't support this black company. I'm going to support the white company. I have a choice. No, I find 1,000 reasons the white man's ice is colder. So from this, let's go away from these big, evil Mobutu Sese Sekos, Blaise Compaorés, just come down to inside of each and every one of us. How can we get rid of the anti-African in us and try to start working towards the African that says, we have solidarity. If you are selling this, I'm going to support you on the basis that whatever problems that come between us will never supersede the problems we have with the common enemy. That's what the Berlin Conference was all about. Whatever problem, at that time, Europeans were killing each other, blowing each other out of the water with cannons over possession of a fort, over possession of this, that. They were killing each other left, right, front, and center. But they decided whatever problems they have amongst each other would never supersede the problems they have with you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you. So if we go back,
Western Europeans, I'm part Balkan,
Mhm.
and that story has always been very important for me to also understand West Africa.
Mhm.
Yeah, the
Mhm.
whole phenomenon of invasion of any human culture.
Mhm.
And it's specific. I think it's important to be specific just so that we can see it more as a human situation. And yeah, this was specifically cultures in Western Europe linked to aristocratic
Russia is
families.
not Western Europe.
No, I'm not talking about Russia. Yeah, that's same link to
That's-
the same.
I'm saying,
That's-
but if we're going to say Western Europe, so this is why I say
Well, yeah, Russia, yes.
Eurasians. I know you want to make the Balkans a special case, but I say Eurasians, and you can agree or not agree, but
Well,
Arabs are not
because
Western
it's-
Europeans either, and they are on stolen land right now.
Because when we generalize, we can't
Mhm.
really get to the bottom of it. When we put everyone in the same basket, it's very specific what happened between Western, Central.
There's policy and then there's strategy.
Southeastern.
There's policy and there's strategy. In terms of policy, Europeans, and you can say just the Western ones if we want to pretend, because there are also, Norwegian ones who are caulking the ships. There are also, Spanish ones, so that's not Western. There are also
That is
Italian ones.
Western, talking specifically like West, East, like
There
that.
are Russians, the Cold War. There are Arabs. There are Indo-Aryans
I
in
understand what
India
you're
right
saying.
now
Okay, I hear you. Just
against the
specifically when we're
Dalit,
talking
Dravidian,
the
indigenous
Berlin
black people.
Conference and
I'm saying we can go to the
people
Berlin
killing
Conference,
each other, it's
but we
not
need to
really-
understand that Eurasia is one continent, and at the end of the day, whatever problems that they've had with each other, they have been willing, and the historical record will show, they have been willing to say, whatever problems we have with each other, those problems never supersede the problems that they have with all African people. And when I say African people, I mean black people. When I say black people, I mean African people. So I know you want to make the Balkans a special case,
No,
that's
it's like
fine.
Eurasian, we're talking about Mongolia,
Mhm.
we're talking about Kazakh, Turkmen. we're
So
talking
look at the
about
work
Roma, we're
of,
talking
so look at the
about-
work of Renoko Rashidi, and you will see that the indigenous populations in all of those places were black populations. The indigenous
That's true.
populations in all of those places were
Yes,
black
I-
populations.
Yeah,
So how did they come to be what you are now talking about in terms of what you're talking about the Mongolians? Let's look
I'm
at
aware of
India.
that concept, that idea.
Very good. So let's look at India.
Just talking about Berlin Conference.
Okay, so
Because it's very, everything is so ambiguous and specific to its time.
so this is why I say it comes down to, I understand, this is why we have to look at policy versus strategy. Now in terms of policy, when they came to Africa, even the people who were making these deals, a lot of those ones ended up on the ship too. You're walking these enslaved Africans to the ship,
Of course.
and you're making a deal on the ship, and then the ship sails, right? So this, at the end of the day, they said, regardless of anything you think that we're buddies and partners, all of you are potential enslaved Africans. When it come down to colonization, they didn't say, okay, well, let's just leave alone Eastern Cameroon because those were our buddies. At the end of the day, policy is that all of you are black Africans, and self-preservation dictates that the whites are on this side and the enemy Africans are on that side. Whatever you think the case is, colonization, enslavement, so forth and so on, is all of you, right? Now, when it came down to strategy, that's when they were willing to see these differences. Okay, Hutus and Tutsis. Okay, let's Akans and Ewes. Okay, Igbos and Yorubas. Okay, Yorubas and Hausa. So in policy, they say all of you are one thing. But in strategy, that's where they're willing to see, all right, let's see how we can play these two different ones off of each other. Now let's look at Eastern Europe in terms of its role in World War I, World War II, Lebensraum, all these concepts, right? So by the same token, for us as African people, we can look at all of them in terms of policy, but then in terms of strategy, what do we do about these Eurasians? All right, the fact that Serbians and Croatians don't see themselves as being the exact same thing. How do we, as African people, further our goals of self-preservation in light of the strategy of how to deal with that? Russians and Germans have beef. All right, what do we as African people, in terms of a strategic thing, deal with that one? You understand?
There is diversity here, just as there is diversity there, and diverse agendas, and that's always been the case. I really want to find out, is there a way to access this egalitarian era of Kemet? Because I'm not really fulfilled with the speculations offered from the pharaonic period, and I'm
Mhm.
always seeking for this period that you're talking about. I had no idea that somebody's written about it.
Mhm.
How can I get text or just a lead to that matriarchal period?
Yeah, person talk about it.
That's my wow. That's such a deep problem to understand the human species here, and yeah, the whole planet. This is really important.
Part of the reason why there are texts that say the opposite, because the paradigm that this person is talking about is Asar as an agricultural deity. So he says, we have to go out of history and look into mythology. And let me see if I can pull this up. And in it, he says that Asar is the prototypical example of this egalitarian model of someone who was not using violence and decided to, let's just discuss things and come together on that basis. However, when you look at the great hymn to Asar, it talks about the one who is mighty of arm, who smites his enemy, and so forth and so on. So the texts are actually going, the problem is that the modern day mythology and imagination isn't based on the original texts. I hope you understand that. Yeah. So the problem is that this concept isn't based on the original text. It's based on what somebody thinks is better in this day and age. Because when you go to the original text, he's saying Asar was this peaceful person who did so forth. But when you read the great hymn to Asar, it says the one who is mighty of arm, strong of sword, who smites his enemies and strikes fear into the hearts of, the rebels, so forth and so on. So the person who, this modern day person who is doing his Shemsu, whatever, the paradigm that he's pointing to, I'm trying to say it in the nicest way possible, that the texts don't bear out what he's saying, right?
So we don't have a modern lead to this time. We don't have a modern scholar who's
There's somebody now who is saying that this is the problem. This is the problem, is that if we want to say let's do this egalitarian thing, let's not say that it's based on something in the past if it's not based on something in the past. By the same token, we can say all of those things in the past were not good. So let's do something different and let it be good. The problem comes in when you are not being truthful. If you say this model that I'm proposing now is based on something ancient, but then when we go to the text and read this ancient thing, it's saying the exact opposite of what you're saying. If that's the case, then just leave the ancient thing behind and say all of that stuff was not good. Today, let's have Chinese and whites and Balkans and everything else come together. Let's do something entirely different. Then you're rooted in truth, just saying that this is what I want to do. The problem is when you say this is an ancient thing, then we go and read the ancient things and that's not there.
Yeah, I guess it goes down to what you're talking about, just going within and really empowering your intuition to recreate. Well, I guess it seems like that's the natural progression we need to take to survive here. And perhaps there's no way to find out from the past.
Then make your own thing, but don't be untruthful and say I'm pulling this from the ancient past. Just don't. That's my only issue.
Of course.
Right.
What?
So here we go.
So facts.
So this is Asar, what the Greeks called Osiris. This is a translation from the Stela of Amenmos, the great hymn to Asar, so-called Osiris. So this is the same mythical deity who our friend is saying was peace-loving and only used, egalitarian methods, a Shemsu method. But then read the top of page 83. When you go to the original text, it says, mighty when he fells the rebel. That does not sound like discussions and whatever. Strong-armed when he slays his foe, who casts fear of him on his enemy, who vanquishes the evil plotters, whose heart is firm when he crushes the rebels. And then it goes on and on again. So don't tell me that this deity was the ancient mythical Gandhi, who Gandhi himself was a sergeant major doing wars, blah blah blah. fought against the Dalit, so forth and so on. Don't tell me that you are pulling from the ancient past when it's not true. And again, the point of all of these things is listen to the voice of your African ancestors without European or even African interpreters, because some of those African interpreters may have other agendas, or whoever it is. Just read what it is. Even me, you say whatever your agenda is on that, so just read it. Without any interpretation, just read what your ancestor said. Don't obfuscate and prevent me from seeing this just because you're trying to run an agenda and you got Chinese folks on your team. Don't run this on me because, all right, you may say, oh, the Balkans are a special case and therefore, so I'll make it general. Somebody may say the Slavs are whatever, I don't know. They're a special case, but that may be your own agenda, right? That may be your own agenda. So whatever your agenda is may be right for you, but you're not looking out for the liberation of African people. You're trying to run your own thing, which is cool. Just say, I'm trying to run my own thing and justify my own whatever I'm trying to justify, and say that's cool. Don't say it's coming from ancient whatever. Say, based on me wanting to bring Eurasians into this thing, this is what I'm going to do. And then African people, black people, can say, all right, now let's look at the historical record. What happened the last 1,000 times that we tried to bring Eurasians into this thing? What happened when Jehuti Mess allowed the Eurasians to come in? What happened before that? When we're talking about what happened when we're talking, we can go through each one: Assyrians, Persians, Arabs, Greeks, Romans, you name them, Portuguese, Dutch, Danes, British. We can name every single population, every single time they set foot and came in contact with, from 5,000 years ago to right this day, every single time without one single counterexample, every single time. Then we can just look at the historical record and say, your agenda that you're trying to push, and say, all right, these Eurasians are nice ones and treat them kind. We can say that doesn't bear out in our interests, because we saw what happened in Tasmania, where they exterminated all full-blooded Tasmanians off the face of the planet, and the only descendants are the ones who they raped the women and they allowed the children to exist. We say we don't think that that's in the best interest of African people. We could say, let's look at what you did in Australia. Let's look at the first Holocaust in Namibia.
What about the views on this history we're speaking about, the views of the Pygmies, particularly the Pygmies that migrated to the Andaman Islands?
Mm-hmm.
Have you got any information, something to share about them? Because I've always felt like those people left. There must have been something that drove them out. They left Kemet, they went to the forest, or they went to the Andaman Islands.
So they left before there was anything called a Kemet. So when you are looking at...
Well, I feel that it's a little more ancient than what we're being told. I feel.
So you're looking at... So look up genetic studies and try to see when migrations came out of Africa, right? So what we're looking at a time frame from, let's say, around 70,000 years ago, and those people left and language was already in place. All of these things that we associate with modern humans, all of that was in place. It wasn't a later, because they've also been an isolated population over the years. So you're talking about Jawara people. That's the indigenous name rather than Pygmies. So if you're looking at...
Yeah, the ones in the Andaman.
Yeah, Jawara.
Several of them. There's some who've never been contacted and they don't want to be contacted, but they're clearly matriarchal. So there is a lead to this time, when we function that way as a society in Africa. There's not enough information about them or their views or their recollection of how we function here as a society.
But again, I would say that we have to stop following the anti-African, Eurocentric, Eurasian model of externalizing, because we do have all the information that we need encoded in our DNA. And it is being choreographed by our melanin. And some examples, I remember Asa Hilliard was showing a film at a conference, the Association of Black Psychologists, in San Francisco, or one of those places in California. And in the film, they showed a young woman, African woman, giving birth. And when she gave birth, shortly after she gave birth, they were holding the baby upside down periodically, and I gasped because I did that with my children. No one told me. It was not in any text that I wrote. It was not in any books, but I just did this. I don't know why I was doing it, and I remember not knowing why I was doing it, but I was doing this thing. And from that time till now, there have been shards of memory and shards of behaviors that are exact with very, very ancient practices, very, very ancient behaviors. No one told me, no one knew. And yet I'm doing these things. And so for me to, and that's probably the only exception that I take to the Pan-African movement with respect to ancient Kemet or whatever, is that it places a preponderance on knowledge and information and finding it out and knowing it, which is all well and good, but they put too much on it and not enough on, okay, but what's already in you? The stuff that we're talking about and studying is already in you. It's so yes, this is good to know. I'm certainly not mad about it. Hell, I'm here in class, so I can't be too mad about it. But I also can't neglect the fact that there are all these other things that we find ourselves doing and saying. My mother, if you tell my mother she's an African, she'll be insulted. And yet I remember her growing up saying, telling me to tell someone ta-ta, tell them ta-ta. And I said, what's ta-ta? She says it means thank you. And this is an ancient language, and she's speaking it. And my mother has the greatest disdain for African and Africa, the greatest. She's like the walking dead. And the fact that I'm here, and the fact that I've locked my hair, she thinks it's utterly worthless. And I'm just completely throwing away my life. And yet she's saying ta-ta. So we're growing up with all of these things that's already in us. And I think that it's now time, you begin to hear James Small, Jewel Pookrum, Dr. Richard King, Dr. Anne Brown, Regent Queen Mother Adelaide Simpson beginning to talk about some of these self-same things where they're saying, no, seriously, start doing it. I didn't know that Aye Kweyarma was going to have the response that he had when I talked about the susu. In my head, I'm thinking, I'm probably doing something the wrong way, but let me just check in just in case. And when he expressed surprise that we were doing an all-black susu, I was just like, oh snap, it was another one of those moments. So we have to guard against the Eurocentric, the Eurasian practice of externalizing all of our answers and all of our resources and not remembering that they come from within. It makes sense to me that they do it because they're Yoruba. So of course they gotta go outside because they ain't got nothing inside. But that's not us, that's not our story, that's not our journey. So I align with the Pan-African Survival Thrust and the quest and the search for the right recording and the proper positioning of true history. You'll get an argument for me out of that. But I do take exception sometimes to the preponderance that we place in it. When you have us writing this is why I'm coming to class. Because I'm in the act of writing these symbols, and in the act of writing it, it's doing something. I can feel it's doing something. That's why I'm coming. And if I'm tapping into that inner wisdom, when you call and said, okay, when you guys, just get started, and I'm on my way, I'll be just a little bit late, there was something internally that aligned with that. I wasn't like, oh, he's coming and whatever, we'll just sit here and chit-chat and paint our fingernails. There was something that wanted to comply with the significance of what it is that we're having here, rather than just dismiss it and treat it like, So that's my thing. We gotta stop this habit of externalizing all of this stuff. And for me to come here, if I'm in alignment with the spirit, with all of these things, and I don't mean this as an insult to you at all, but I would not have absorbed all of this time for my own personal interests. Rather, I would have taken the brother after class and I would have pursued these things perhaps even more in depth, because I would have recognized that this is a class and they're obviously here to talk about something other than my own personal interests. And my spirit would have aligned with that, and I would have flowed with that, and I would have been okay with that. And I would have recognized that this brother, I would have intuitively picked up on the fact that this brother was probably cool to discuss this after class or in subsequent emails and what have you, and I would not have absorbed as much time.
Actually, I did have a sensitivity to that from the beginning, but you all seemed open to share and speak, so I thought this was a space for a debate, because all of this just activates thoughts and feelings that we want to share. After all, that's the whole point of remembering and coming together as people. Yeah. I don't feel.
Okay. Well, we're 21 minutes over the 3 o'clock mark. We were going to deal with different writings. I think at the end of the day, I think what happened is what happened. So we can get something beneficial or get something detrimental out of it, how we choose. But let's continue work on this. We'll work on chapter 3. So if everyone can read chapter 3, this is how to read Egyptian hieroglyphs. And we're looking at, special spellings. And
This is page 34 and 35?
we were going to just do a brief review of that because we had looked at up to 34, Hati, so forth and so on. So let's go on to page 36 and 37. The offering formula, offerings passed on to the deceased.
Oh, okay, well, we already started?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. I wanted to do a brief review and then come back and, move forward.
Okay.
So we'll deal with that.
We also were wondering how to write your
Yes.
name.
Badele.
We were gonna try
In
to
this
say,
script.
congratulations, Dr. Badale, and try to write it in the thing, but it got to be such.
It's on my door. My name in Mdw Ntr is on my door.
But Don was saying the arms is part and parcel of
Like for adoration.
yeah,
or
the
praise.
adoration part.
Oh, you're looking for dua, which is praise or adoration.
Uh-huh.
This is what you're seeing here is nka. That's to the soul of,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's the ka,
Mm-hmm.
the spirit of soul.
So how would it look if we were going to write it? Congratulations. But it wouldn't, I understand it wouldn't transliterate,
Right,
it
right.
would maybe be something like you're saying, to the praise of,
Yeah.
because Don was saying something that I hadn't thought about with the up arms.
Yeah, there was a man,
Mhm.
Yeah.
with his hands up, and I guess the symbol for being spoken.
Right. This is what you're looking for, adoration. Yao is one. Yao.
Do I have that dictionary?
This is in everybody's information that I sent.
Mm-hmm.
Let me pull this one up. There's Nejat Wefa, which is by Dr. Raketi Amin. And basically what she is trying to do is make Mdw Ntr a spoken language. So just like how you have Esperanto in these made-up languages that Europeans speak, and that they recolonize African people with, that there is a
But
movement.
like, from just the top of your head, could you write whatever the equivalent is? Congratulations, Dr. Campbell.
Okay.
Dr. Obadale Campbell.
Okay, have a nice evening.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for coming.
I will call because I want to come to the gathering.
Okay, no problem.
I'd like to know more about the homeschooling.
Absolutely, no problem.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Make sure you check your phone.
Now on my door, I use this as k, and then but here I'm going to use a biliteral, which is kim by itself, the same kim that you have in Kemet. So iao or toi, or badele, kamba. For, as I was thinking, I was saying also the title.
Would it with any of the other stuff that we wrote today? Like
The chick is in
phrase?
there. The chick is in there.
Yeah, I'm using that for who.
Mhm.
The chick is in there twice. And then the water is in there twice.
Cause what we wrote, what was it, offerings to the king?
Uh-huh.
You know, from the discussion earlier, something else that came out of that was self-preservation. Because, you know, whereas those who identify the self as black people are very clear that we need to do things beneficial to black people, those who are mixed may have a different agenda, which is something that is beneficial to mixed folks. So as we're talking about things that are useful for black people, African liberation and so forth, that because sometimes of our background, one drop rule, we would assume, okay, you would also be interested in what's best for black people. But at the same time, it's like what Chancellor Williams was talking about, miscegenation, that you create intentionally a buffer class because they're trying to look out for that exactly, either for the side of Eurasians as a whole, or just for the side of those who are mixed. And it's not necessarily, oh, we're all black people, I have your best interest at heart. So I'm using Seba,
Okay.
and then myself as the determinative, as a male seated.
And Seba is SBA.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
So this reads, but it doesn't read congratulations, Dr. Badele.
It's
Seba.
like adoration.
Adoration.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good job.
But let's see if we can find.
And so this reads how in English? Does it read, we adore you? Dr.
So it would be like adoration to Albadele Kanban.
Adoration
Doctor,
to.
yeah.
Okay.
So the is the to,
Okay.
Right.
Adoration to.
right? So it depends on, you could either read it to, like in the direction of a human, as opposed to which would be in the direction. It could also be written, understood as of, as an indirect genitive. So the adoration of this person, but either way would be using and then it would be up to the translator of how they want to render it into the English.
Okay.
So literally adoration to or of Abande Kamba Seba. Exactly.
And there's the scroll we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Let's see if
That's the scroll, the vertical thing.
Mm-hmm.
this is Seba. This is also Dwa. Let's come here. So teaching. Dwa. Seba T as student, pupil, star. So here we have Seba, and this is what's profound. If you look at various African languages, like Wolof, Jang ak Jangale, Jang ak Jangale. So there's a similar conception of learning and teaching. One of my friends from undergrad, he said his grandfather used to always say, "Come here, boy, let me learn you how to tie your shoe. Let me learn you how to tie your shoe." This concept in Yoruba use the same word for to learn and to teach. Ko is to, so I guess ma ko ni iwe yi, mo ma ko iwe yi. So I will teach you this book, or I'm going to learn this book. The exact same word. If you look at Kikongo, longa, longuka. So learning, teaching, that they have either the same root. It's always this similar concept as complementary opposites. This one is part of the other one. You find the same thing in Kemet. So you see Seba as both pupil, then you see it here as teach and teaching, written teaching, instruction. So we're looking at the teach and teaching and applying this, and applying the seated male determinative for human. Again, teach, teaching. And also what's interesting, we're looking at this one, teach, teaching. School, schoolhouse. So basically, depending on what the determinative is, it will give you a different reading. But for a male doing that profession, it's the seated male determinative.
We were having a similar conversation about the scribe too. What was actually considered a scribe?
And would you be considered a scribe, or would you be considered something else?
This is up to our interpretation.
Right.
Yeah.
But the indigenous term would be sesh, and let me show you. So sesh is written like a pad that has all the scribal writing utensils tied to it, and then you have a string between them.
Is it like one and the same of the teacher and the writer, or is it very distinct?
So this is it. So this is a tool, and then you see the line connecting it, and then you have what's actually used to write here, and then you see the seated male to let you know it's a male scribe determinative. Let me see if I can show you. I could be a scribe because I'm also an author. I'm published.
That's what you were saying.
Yeah.
So like Ty, there.
Right.
How one thing can mean many things.
Yeah.
And then in ancient Kemet, you had many different. You had the same person who could have many different titles.
Okay.
So the person could be, governor of this nome, and then also, the lone companion of the ruler, and also be, the seal bearer of the ruler. So if you look at some of the monumental texts, you'll see the person listing all their various titles. Sometimes also along with how they came by those titles. This ruler, and usually you'll have the ruler that it occurred under, and this year of the ruler. That's what we were looking at, before. In this year of the ruler, I did this, I did that. So it's basically your CV carved in stone. That was the autobiography of Winnie as well. He talked about his various exploits and bringing African people, black people together in order to